US and European countries are taking action against Iran's nuclear ambitions. Tehran has increased its stockpile of uranium just short of weapons-grade enrichment, reaching more than 32 times the limit set out in the Iran nuclear deal. That's according to the UN's nuclear watchdog.
This is the first time that they are saying, okay, we stop. So I think this merits serious consideration from the non-proliferation point of view. Again, I say it in the context of a host of issues that need to be addressed in its entirety.
Tehran is offering to cap its highly enriched uranium stock. So what's Iran's plan? Is Iran on the path to a bomb, or is it playing a game of chicken with the West, just as Donald Trump returns to the White House? On the podcast with us is David Albright, a physicist and a weapons expert who founded the Institute for Science and International Security. He was a former United Nations weapons inspector who challenged the Bush administration's claims of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. I'm Negar Moshahedi, and this is Eye for Iran. Before we start, please leave us a review at the end of this episode. David Albright, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, happy to join you. It's good to talk to you.
I'm really excited to have you on the program today. And for our audience who may or may not know, before the U.S. was set to invade Iraq on the premise of weapons of mass destruction, you were one of the very few experts in the field who warned the Bush administration that its intelligence was unreliable. Obviously, you were right about that. And flash forward to now, and the IAEA report is warning that Iran has uranium enriched to 60% purity, and that's just a short technical step away from weapons-grade levels. And you've said before, when it comes to Iran and the pursuit of the nuclear bomb, obviously this is a dangerous path. Now, when it comes to Iran's nuclear program, do we know what we need to know? Meaning, do we know where all of these underground facilities are, or could Iran be hiding something?
Oh, Iran is certainly hiding various things. I mean, the International Atomic Energy Agency and every Western intelligence agency believes that they had a fairly substantial nuclear weapons in the past, and part of it may be going on today. And Iran denies everything. The IA was able to establish that it had what they call undeclared uranium. Country like Iran is supposed to declare its entire nuclear program, and the inspectors show they haven't done that, and Iran refuses to cooperate. They're making gas centrifuges which enrich uranium. They're not revealing that to the international inspectors, and so they are in essence producing these centrifuges in secret, and we don't know how many. So there's a whole range of things, and unlike the case in Iraq, the evidence is overwhelming that Iran is hiding things, and there's a genuine concern that it may decide to build nuclear weapons.
Given your expertise and what you just told us, how does that make you feel and the world order right now? What feeling does that give to you? Is it more than concern?
Well, I don't personally. Yeah, I feel very worried. I feel that the usual tools are just not working, and increasingly we're caught in a situation where violence becomes the answer, and by states and or by terrorist groups, and so it's very hard to find political solutions, but it's very hard to not fear that these military conflicts can spread and grow, and so have to feel very, very worried about what's going to take place in the future.
Wow, so you describe it as a fearful state ahead now and in the future. And you mentioned that certain mechanisms are not working. Are there any mechanisms in place to spot any suspicious activity at all?
I mean, the only one that one has hopes for is the mechanisms created by the International Atomic Energy Agency, and they're always trying to, get Iran to cooperate. They just the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency just asked Iran to stop making any more 60% enriched uranium. And but he also wants Iran to cooperate and come into compliance with its obligations under the non-proliferation treaty. And Iran basically always either says no or promises it to do it next month, and then next month come and it never happens. So I mean, the IA mechanism is in play, and that can be productive as a way to make some progress. Um, so those mechanisms are working, but the broader mechanism of how do you convince Iran not to build nuclear weapons is how do you prevent a war between Iran and Israel that where Israel will be striking because they are convinced Iran is trying to build nuclear weapons. Those mechanisms are the ones that could have very horrible unintended consequences.
Can you talk about what some of those unintended consequences could potentially be?
Well, so far, um, Iran and Israel have been striking each other with Iran striking with missiles and drones, and Israel striking with missiles. They've it, Iran's attacks have been completely ineffective. Their missiles often fail. They don't hit targets. The defense system of Israel brings down quite a few, and so some missiles get through, but typically they're the ones that Israel just says, "Look, we're not going to take it down," um, or is wildly off target, and not even doesn't even get anywhere near a target. Um, and Israel has very consciously struck using a great deal of intelligence information, had missile production in Iran. And so sites, you may see 6, 7, 8 buildings, and they pick 2 or 3 that if those go, Iran can't build missiles, or at least longer range missiles, solid fueled missiles. And so um, they're not killing many people. They're attacking buildings with key equipment in it and so you don't see a general kind of shock and awe going on like you do in Gaza or in Lebanon. It's I wouldn't say it's scripted, but there is some thought given to trying to give restraint. But at any moment, that could break down, and Iran may strike with more missiles. It may hit a target, maybe hits Tel Aviv, kills tens or hundreds of civilians, and then all bets are off. Israel could really lash out, and we've seen how they can lash out when they feel they've really been attacked.
Are we
So
on
I
the
think
path to war then?
I think there is a path to war. I think we're looking at several paths. One of them probably the one widest and in width is a path of increased military action, and so it's very important to try to restrain the sides, but any any accident or it could be deliberate. Maybe Iran would target Tel Aviv. I mean, we know it can hit Tel Aviv. It can hit a big target. It just struggles with hitting military targets that are smaller. Um, and Israel may get very frustrated, um, and they may decide that Iran has launched a nuclear weapons program, and then they decided to take out several of the nuclear sites and materials, and then Iran lashes out in a major way, and then Israel responds. So I think it is a very dangerous time, but there's other paths too, and that I think both Israel and Iran do not want to go to war, um, but they want to protect their interest, and so that balance is very difficult.
And speaking of Israel, Rafael Grossi in a press conference Wednesday said that there's no indication that the Parachin military complex that Israel hit last month had any part of Iran's nuclear program. However, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that was a strike on part of Iran's nuclear program. Do you know what part of Iran's nuclear program then that Israel hit?
Well, we're pressing the Israelis for an answer, and also certainly encouraging major media organizations that have a lot of credibility um, to get a better answer. But I think Director General Grossi misstated some things in that press conference. I listened to what he said very carefully, and this site, there's two major buildings there that were involved in the old nuclear weapons program of the early 2000s, and they were involved in testing kind of nuclear weapon components that require high explosive testing. And I won't go into the details, but each building has very large, really strong chambers where you can detonate. In one case, 50 kilograms of high explosive and do your experiment. Another one, which is the one attack called Telegon 2, had a chamber that could handle maybe 10 kilograms or so. And the inspectors demanded to get into those sites. They knew it was related to past nuclear weapons work. Iran spent 3-4 years sanitizing the sites and just taking out everything, washing down everything and trying to keep the inspectors from detecting any uranium because it's used in the experiments. Finally, in 2015, the director general, the previous one, got into one of the buildings, Telegon 1, and they saw nothing was left in the building. It had really been remodeled, emptied and remodeled. So it's consistent with what we understood. But the Iranians gave the inspectors a tough time about taking environmental samples where you're looking for minute traces of uranium. They insisted that they take the samples. The Iranians did take the samples, and the IAEA found evidence of uranium. So here you have a situation where there's another case of undeclared uranium at Telegon 1. And Telegon 2, we know from the information that was purloined by Israel in Tehran in 2018, we know what happened in that building, and there were real experiments for nuclear weapons. Now, I think we believe all those high explosive chambers were removed, just like Telegon 1 was emptied, Telegon 2 has been emptied. So then what possibly could be going on? And what we think our best current estimate or guess assessment based on information from the media largely is there's equipment from another former nuclear weapons site that's stored there. And it's equipment to make, and I hope you don't mind the detail, make plastic explosives that are used in a part of the nuclear weapon that it initiates the high explosive charge that then detonates, compresses the core and causes the atomic explosion. So it's equipment that was part of the nuclear weapons program. What we don't know is if there were some other activities taking place in that building. But I think Director General Grossi knows all this. And so if old nuclear weapons related equipment was stored at Telegon 2, that's of interest to the International Atomic Energy Agency. And uranium was detected traces of uranium were detected in Telegon 1. So that's also of interest to the inspector. So I think he misspoke. And probably because he just didn't want to deal with it. His plate is full. But I do think Netanyahu was correct in what he said. Sorry for the long answer.
So when you no, that was fascinating. And when you say he misspoke, and as a former UN inspector yourself, and all of this back and forth between Iran and the IAEA, and all of these talks, and the fact that they have increased their stockpile despite all of the talks going on, have you potentially lost faith in the IAEA?
No, not at all. No. I think it's a very powerful organization, we try to understand intelligence information. We do our own analysis. We certainly have discussions, formal discussions. I mean, legitimate. We're not looking. These aren't leaks in a back alley. This is meeting with intelligence officials in capitals, and they have holes in what they know, and the IA is there to understand the situation much better. And so they, in a sense, I used to use the term boots on the ground. I mean, it's a little too aggressive, but they are on the ground collecting information. And sometimes they're denied access, they're denied information, but they pick up pieces and they're very capable analytically. And they have other ways of gathering information through satellite and that imagery analysis, through getting a little little bits from governments, and so they can put together a pretty sound picture. It's not complete, and they certainly can, I would say, do better than, let's say, U.S. intelligence in terms of understanding Iran's nuclear program, and particularly its sort of efforts to make nuclear weapons.
So are they the only hope then of preventing a nuclear Iran at this point?
No, to be honest, I think the only hope of preventing a nuclear Iran right now is twofold. One is just Iran regime becoming so scared of military strikes that they just don't cross the line. Um, and that could be associated with a really harsh enforcement of oil sanctions, which could cripple the economy. So I think instilling fear in their minds is the first line of defense. And Israel opened up a kind of a new aspect of the military strikes. One, it'll first strike very precisely to take out things that make it very hard to build a nuclear weapon. Um, then if Iran rebuilds, then they take out their oil production. So and it wouldn't be that hard to do. They eliminated Iran's air defenses, so they can hit the nuclear sites and then hit oil production um, if Iran rebuilds, and Iran knows that. I mean, Israel pointedly took out the air defense systems at the oil production facility, the main one. So I think that's a new dynamic. Another one is President Trump. I mean, Biden failed. I mean, he tried, he failed to get any kind of constraints on Iran's nuclear program. Um, Trump, you don't know what he's going to do, and he sent out a signal recently that maybe he's wants to make a deal with this purported meeting between Elon Musk and the Iranian ambassador to the UN. I mean, we don't know if it really even happened, but it's reported, and so there maybe Trump is trying to say, look, don't build nuclear weapons now because you can get a good deal with us. So his unpredictability may contribute to the Iranian regime holding back from moving forward. If actually building the bomb, I think they may escalate and do something short of building the bomb that we don't like.
So, like you say, inch closer, but then don't do it type of thing.
That's right.
And I was going to say that, Trump has also reportedly said things like, well, I'm going to bankrupt Iran into negotiating a deal with me. We're going to prevent a nuclear Iran by bankrupting them first. So you feel like that's a legitimate possibility, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, they, you, sanctions are, sanctions are not enough by themselves. And, and you have to present a deal that is credible. It may be tough, but we're not. I don't think the Trump administration wants to militarily defeat the Iranian regime, and then you can dictate terms. So, yeah, if the people of Iran overthrew the regime, then the U.S. and the world could probably, effectively dictate terms because the new government, if it's more democratic, probably wants to get rid of all this stigma. Um, if it's a military dictatorship, they may get tougher. So there is a risk there too. But going back to the thing that the Trump administration has to come up with a credible offer, and they failed to do that in the last time they were running things. They imposed the sanctions, but they didn't make a credible offer to Iran of a nuclear deal that it would even consider.
So did things get better or worse under Trump in terms of Iran's nuclear ambitions?
I mean, is it better or worse?
Trump
You
1.0, Trump 1.0 the first time, not 2.0. We
well,
don't know yet.
I mean, I think Trump went through phases, and I think he finally threw the deal out and didn't really have much of a plan except imposing sanctions. And in terms of getting a deal, I mean, what they've tabled was too extreme for Iran to even think about. Um, I hope they've learned from that because last time essentially they did lose. We don't know what would have happened in the second term. Maybe they would have gotten their act together, but they handed Biden a very untenable, um, very difficult situation where Iran's escalating, and these sanctions are really taking a toll. And Biden says, okay, we'll negotiate and we'll lighten up on sanctions. And Iran continues to grow its program and benefits enormously from not having the sanctions enforced. And so now Trump comes in and he's going to really enforce the sanctions is his goal. And that's to bankrupt Iran. But Iran could then say, okay, we're going to build nuclear weapons. What are you going to do about it? And, um, and is he really behind striking Iran? I mean, you listen to the voices in the Trump camp, and some just want to be out of the Middle East. It's not our war. We don't care. Don't spend any money. Others are hawkish. Who's Trump going to listen to if he enforces the sanctions and then Iran moves to build nuclear weapons?
So, as a nuclear expert and a former UN inspector, what would your number one advice be to Donald Trump if he's watching this right now?
To Donald Trump, I mean, I don't think you can advise Donald Trump. I mean, you can convince him not to do some horrible thing at tremendous personal cost, professional cost, but I don't think one can advise him. I mean, he just does what he believes he wants to do at that moment. So, I mean, I mean, if it was going to be a rational government where the policies would develop out of a presidential point of view and then policies created that the president implements, that you would want to make sure that Iran understood that it would face devastating military consequences if it built nuclear weapons. It will have many more sanctions enforced, um, and that we would strongly support Israel, and as really the one who would be doing the attack if that was necessary. So we would be trying to also get the Abraham arrangement back on track, which means finding a solution to the whole war with Gaza and Lebanon. So, but the U.S. government has wrestled with bigger problems. Um, but it is the nuclear is embedded in a larger problem, and it takes the collective wisdom and knowledge of the U.S. government to figure out how to make this solve these problems and move forward. So and again, I mean, no one could ever advise Trump with what I just said. It just doesn't compute.
Speaking of the censure, there was one that passed in June of this year, and nothing seemed to really happen. But again, as you mentioned, the geopolitical atmosphere is different this time around. We've got open and direct strikes between Iran and Israel. We've got the return of Donald Trump, who is set to revive his maximum pressure strategy. And you've got Israel that decimated Iran's deterrence power, their proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas. What do you think? How will Iran react differently, if at all, this time around to this censure? We've got um, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi saying that they will have an immediate and decisive response. But given the context that Iran is militarily and politically weak right now, will they react differently than they did in June?
Well, it's really the heart of the issue. That's very important questions, and the powers that be, the Europeans and the United States, are moving forward with this resolution that increases the censure of Iran, and Iran often just doesn't want to let what's going on be made public or organized by the inspectors in a report that goes to the members. And so the intention is to pass this and require a report, and there'll be some central language in it too, or at least there'll be a justification for asking for the report. But that was in the last resolution in June, and so the next step would be a central censure res, well, the next step would be a comprehensive report. So I'm frustrated, and many are, that how slow this process has worked. I mean, the Europeans, and particularly the United States, the Biden administration, put the brakes on the board of governors doing something. They the idea
Why
was
is that? We're trying to appease Iran, or what's going on here?
it was it's hard to fathom. Yeah, and I can only speak what I know. I can remember 2, 3 years ago meetings at the Biden administration National Security Council, just one-on-one meetings, where they basically said, we just don't want a crisis in the Middle East. We don't want to escalate. We don't want to take any deliberate action against Iran, nuclear, actions because we think that'll escalate and we don't want a crisis. I mean, and what's happened shows the absurdity of trying to in the Middle East have a policy that's based on not having a crisis. But that was one factor, and the other was the elections. Just didn't want to have this issue playing out before the election, which also was rather short-sighted. And I would say, I don't know what to call it, nationalistically egotistical. I mean, there's a big world out there, and the U.S. administration was holding back the Europeans who wanted to move faster in it to escalate the censure of Iran because there's a logic to it. Where it ends up is the German, French, and or British snapping back inspections under the old nuclear deal. And those sanctions would snap back. The missile embargo would go back into place, the arms embargo. And so that's sort of the logical outcome of what the Europeans have been trying to do at the Board of Governors, because those resolutions provide international legitimacy to the actions that could be taken to snap back inspections, UN sanctions and the embargoes, and to impose more national or regional sanctions. So it's the Europeans are frustrated at the pace, and they I think are determined to try to impose this central resolution. And I'll tell you, they had to, in a sense, trick the United States. The United States last June did not want a resolution. They tried to convince the Europeans not to introduce it, not to make it public in any way. And what the Europeans did to finesse the Biden administration is they put in the one thing that earlier the Biden administration had said, well, maybe that's where we should go. That's what we should ask for. So they made that this comprehensive report a centerpiece of the June resolution because then the U.S. couldn't oppose it. They'd already been on record saying, oh, maybe that's a good idea. But the U.S. did not want a resolution. And the Europeans, in a sense, outplayed them, and the U.S. had to go along. And now, it's just Iran isn't doing enough to deal in response to that resolution. It offered to cap or stop making 60% enriched uranium. And Director General Grossi invested a lot of political capital in that, but it was rejected because last time this was discussed, not only was 60% enriched uranium capped, it was reduced. Iran had to blend down, as they call it, basically blend down this 60% material down to, let's say, 20% or 5%. So they reduced the size of the 60% stockpile, not just frozen in place.
And that cap that you mentioned, and you said it can be reduced, so that's technically not like a threshold then, right? You can
Oh,
reduce.
they would say they wouldn't make any more than 185 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, and that's enough for 4 or 5 bombs. So it's a large amount, and it can be turned into 90% um, very quickly. So you could get the first bomb's worth of 90% from some of the 60% in a week or less. So you have too large of an inventory, and so you do need to reduce it. And so just saying we won't make any more, yeah, it's like one of these things. If it's raining, pouring, and it starts pouring a little more, it really doesn't matter. Um,
That's a good analogy. And just a technical question, how long does it take to develop a warhead then?
well, it really depends on the country's capabilities and
In Iran.
they've all warm. Yeah, and Iran had this very large, aggressive crash nuclear weapons program of the early 2000s, and it learned a lot about making a nuclear explosive. It was learning how to put the warhead on a ballistic missile, and we think they didn't finish that work, but they know how to make a crude nuclear explosive. Takes time to do it if you decide to do it, but they know how to do it, and there would be some additional testing, we believe, just to make sure everything works properly. But it's well within their means, and so they're much more advanced than Iraq ever was. I mean, they did have a nuclear weapons program in the 1980s. There was ended in 91, and Iran is much much further along than Iraq was in 1991. So I think it Iran can move pretty quickly, and in the crash program, the well, maybe in 6 months they could have a crude nuclear weapon. I mean, if they probably take several more months to build a warhead for a ballistic missile. It would take a couple of years to kind of create a sophisticated nuclear weapons production complex like they were building in the early 2000s. And then, but once they had that, then they could make one warhead after another for ballistic missiles. And but in the earlier program, they didn't have the ability to make weapon grade uranium. They were building a secret enrichment plant, which we now know is Fordo. But they were years away, and so their bottleneck was weapon grade uranium. And now it isn't a bottleneck at all. They can have a oversupply of weapon grade uranium if they move to making nuclear weapons.
And let's talk about the changing rhetoric of Iranian officials. Some of them are now, a lot of the hardliners are openly saying and calling for a bomb. That's something we would
Right.
have been unheard of just a few short years ago. Should we be
Months
taking them?
ago,
Exactly, even a few months ago, you're right. Should we be taking them seriously? Should we be taking them at their word?
I think they don't represent the government, but I think where you have to watch is what the Iranian parliament does. That they're at 37, I believe, if I have the number wrong, were calling for building the bomb. If they could move legislation and that could shift the government's view. And they did that in the past after Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was assassinated or killed put it December the 2021 or 2020. I'm forgetting. Years go by, and the parliament passed a law requiring the government to produce um, much more enriched uranium, deploy many more centrifuges, and it was just passed as a law that was accepted by the government. It's not a true democracy, but the government felt politically it had to accept it, and so you do have to worry that the parliament will organize something that will be pushing the Iranian regime more toward building a bomb. And in fact, one trend we've seen that's kind of very worrisome is that there's evidence they've renewed work at former these nuclear weapon sites, these old Ahmad sites, um, and one is at Parchin called Golab Dora, and one's nearby called Sanjarian, and work is going on, suspicious work involving high explosives, I believe, that that is being done by people who used to be in the program, ex-Ahmad personnel, and they work for this kind of entity with the acronym of SPND, which is the kind of the military research wing, which grew out of the Ahmad plan. So the Ahmad plan people continued to work together after it was well, that project ended, but it continued in a smaller way, and they went through various manifestations, became SPND around 2011, and then they've grown. They've gotten into other areas, but the nuclear weapons people still have a very strong presence there, and the parliament just passed legislation giving SPND more independence, less oversight, and more money. And so this will be the group that makes the bomb, that weaponizes the weapon grade uranium if it's taking place. And so if ex-Ahmad people working at SPND have reactivated Ahmad sites that are involved in the development of nuclear weapons, you have to worry. Now the twist is the intelligence is they don't have approval from the top government. And so they seem to be taking their own initiative, in a sense, getting ready in case a decision's being made. And so you could see the development of these self-initiated projects within SPND to work on parts of the bomb and just do it without approval. And the government leadership isn't going to step in and stop it.
Yeah,
So
Jay Sullivan from the Free Press broke the story on the SPND and the funding. Is that to you an indication of where Iran is going and where we're going with all of this? The path forward?
I think the technical people are preparing to build a bomb. And if they're going to build a bomb at SPND, they want to make sure that it can be done secretly. There's no oversight. They can exclude people in the parliament, in other parts of the Ministry of Defense from knowing what they're doing. That they'll want to tighten security because Israel is so good at infiltrating. And so I think there's a accelerated preparation going on. I think post Amar, they went into a preparation mode, work on unsolved problems, keep the resources and people intact. But now I think they've accelerated their proliferation and trying to cover it by there's no decision to build a bomb, but they want to shorten time frames. And we're just like what they've done on production of weapon grade uranium. Used to be 8 months for that Iran would need to make enough weapon grade uranium for a bomb. Now it's a week or less.
Wow, that is big news. So if we look at kind of like the overall history of all this, Obama and the JCPOA, Trump withdrawing, Israel's Mossad stealing the nuclear archives. I even remember actually watching you in 2011 on the PBS NewsHour, and you were talking about how Iran wasn't cooperating with the IAEA. With all of this back and forth, and again, looking at the history of all of it, how would you describe or characterize what seems to be like this never ending story that appears to have no resolution in sight?
Well, yeah, you're aging and dating me. So
And
this
myself.
has been going on. This has been going on for actually 20 years. And and I think what I've learned from it is pressure works. That Iran didn't build the nuclear weapons in the early 2000s because it got scared. Iran, United States was in Iraq next door. The eye inspectors kind of got newly energized to be much more aggressive and ferreting out secret Iranian nuclear sites, and they were succeeding. And Iran was having to reveal things one after another, and so the Iranians actually decided not to build the nuclear weapons they wanted to build, and kind of hide things, and then keep parts of the program ongoing. But they got scared. And I think now, people always say, oh, sanctions don't have an impact. But if they don't have an impact, why is it every time a deal is brought up as a possibility, the first thing the regime says, you've got to end the sanctions? So I think, so I think Iran is vulnerable to pressure. And it's always complicated that no one tool is going to be your answer. But I think pressure can matter. So I think and that's why what's been going on really, and the IA plays a part of this, keep demanding answers. Keep demanding that Iran tell the truth. Keep demanding that Iran give what they call a complete declaration of its nuclear activities, that it's just part of putting pressure on Iran. And that, we're hoping that, that it'll keep them from building the bomb.
I
And
mean,
you dream of the new government. I mean, you dream of a supreme leader who says, this just isn't worth it. Stupid to build a bomb. Let's go another way. In a personal experience, I mean, you may have too. I mean, the collapse of the Soviet Union, totally unexpected. Engaged in nuclear arms control at the time and worried about, how we're going to prevent nuclear war. South Africa, determined apartheid government committed to nuclear weapons. The leadership changes in their sort of apartheid democracy, which obviously didn't include many people to vote or allow many people to vote. But that new president just said it's not worth it. Let's get too much hassle. We're going to get rid of apartheid and get rid of nuclear weapons and rejoin the international community. And so these kinds of things can happen, and no one expected South Africa to do this. It's completely unexpected, and so I think you hope something like that happens in the Iranian regime, but again, these are low probability events, and we're not expecting them, so you can't predict them, and but you hope, you hope for it, because that'll be the ultimate solution.
amazing. Thank you so much.
Ending on hope is probably the best I can do.
It's always good to end on a positive note. That's David Albright. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
You can always weigh in on the discussion in the comments below. We'd love to know what you think. The Eye for Iran podcast series is created by Iran International, the go-to destination for expert Iranian news in both Farsi and English. For more, head to our dedicated English website, iranintl.com/en.